No? Yeah, okay, perfect. There you go. Now we're good. I just wanted to get on the mic so I could address some of the questions online. Some people were asking if we started. We're not starting yet. We're still letting a few people trickle back in. We'll get started in just a second. While we are waiting, I'll encourage you, this Trade Source newsletter, especially for counselors that are here, this is a good resource to share with your clients. Kind of it goes through different details as to what resources are available to them from the federal government. And so just really kind of a cool resource. It's got several different agencies that are included there. This is something that's published twice a year. And so you can always reach back out to us or look at the census website for the latest version that's available. Okay, we will go ahead and get started. So my name is Stephen Jackson. I come to you guys today on behalf of our Economic Management Division. So the same division that Jerry Horner is in with our trade regulations, and a sister branch and division to who you heard from with Patrick earlier. Today, I come on behalf of our trade data collection branch. So specifically, we're going to be talking about the guidelines to filing your AES information. So we've talked about what's required per the foreign trade regulations. We now know how to classify your product. Now we're going to talk about how do you get that information to us so that we can process it and send it out as a data product. So we've broken it down into really 5 main topics, and then the last one we'll do a live demonstration as long as we have time. It'll obviously depend on questions. If you do have the slide deck, though, it's the last few slides are actually screenshots of what we would cover in the live demonstration if we don't get to that point. And the greatest resource, as I think Karen had mentioned earlier, is going to be the contacts that you get today. And so I definitely encourage you to reach out to us if you ever have any additional questions about any of the slides or any information. So again, I've said we broke it down to 5 different topics. We'll cover the AES process and the filing methods. We'll really focus on AES and ACE. I'm sure you've heard both of those acronyms, even probably in just this presentation. We'll look at preparing to file your EEI. What are some helpful resources? The real meat of the presentation is going to be going through those response messages. So what does the system respond back to you as the filer or to your clients as the filers of that information and how to address those? And then we'll finish up by looking at the AES compliance reports, compliance review program, and again, hitting on the fact of what is the automated commercial environment or ACE. So to start, what is the automated export system? So we've heard it described earlier. The automated export system, or AES, is a system that's actually owned and maintained by U.S. Customs and Border Protection. We, as an agreement with them, because they're collecting the statistical data, help to be the SMEs for getting the data into the system. So we write those requirements to them to build it out so that we can collect the data that we need. It's important, though, to know that really it's a joint effort between Census and Customs in order to keep that operational for the trade. So just to kind of show you the size and scale of what AES processes on a monthly basis, we show some statistics here. So in June, so this is the latest data that we have that's published already and out. You can see that the total statistical shipments that we captured in the system were a little over 1.2 million. Those were processed and submitted back to the system. So that's then goes through AES. Then it has to go to the micro branch to actually get looked at the data, cleaned up before it can go get published. That accounted for about $132.5 billion. What's really cool, though, is these unique filer IDs. So about 17,000 people actually went in and filed in the system, okay? That represents a total US PPI count, though, of over 330,000 people. So only 17,000 or so are in the system keying in that data, but those represent 330,000 US PPIs that are actually sending goods overseas. Just kind of show you the scale of what AES is on a monthly basis. If you've ever called our call center, we might have talked in the past, you might have talked directly to Jerry. Our staffs are pretty small, especially for the volume that happens on a monthly basis. So we just ask patience with you. Like it was said earlier, we do get back relatively early. If you email us, if you call us, we do work on an Eastern time schedule, usually about 7 to 5 o'clock or so. So let's really hound in here. This is a graphical representation of what the AES process looks like. You would be represented, or your clients would be represented in the upper left-hand side as the export community. And you would have three different options, which we'll talk in the next slide about, as to getting your information or getting your electronic export information into the automated export system. This is where we'll spend a little bit of time just to make sure that we're clear. So you have those three different options. You're sending in the EEI, or those data elements that Jerry had covered earlier that are laid out in the foreign trade regulations. You're sending that information into the automated commercial environment, because automated commercial environment is that single window that Jerry also mentioned in his presentation that houses several different programs on it, one of which is the automated export system. That's how we represent it down here with these computers. You have the automated export system. You might have the automated broker interface. You might have manifest data or transportation in a different module. You might have the reports, which is what you're going to hear about next from Mayumi. All of those are different systems. They're housed in the mainframe or the universal data set of ACE, okay? So it's important to know it's going into ACE, but it's actually getting processed and stored in the automated export system. That's where all those edits and validations are happening. And so that's what we're really focusing on today. AES will then take the data that you submitted, they'll process it from what the system edits and requirements are, they'll send you back a response message. In either of these forms that you see here, again, we're going to get into each one of those in a few slides, and that's really the meat of the presentation today. Any questions on the process flow? Everybody understand the difference on ACE and AES? Cool. All right, so what are those different options? So that was the first step. As the export community, you have these three different options. We break them into two separate categories. The first one starting off with AES Direct. Probably the most popular form of AES Direct is our web portal filing application. That's what we'll be going through as a live demonstration today. Even if you're a larger company, having an AES Direct web portal access is critical for times that your system might be down. It is a free service. It's really nice because we help maintain that with customs. And so we try to build in upfront edits for the system so that you can't create certain fatal errors, as we would call them, in the system. And so it's really kind of a good user interface to use, especially for novice users or small businesses might have that as a good option. The next option there would be bulk upload. This is for companies that, maybe doing a one-off keying is a little bit cumbersome. Their business model makes them a little larger than that, where they need to key several. They have the option then to upload a file into the system. The file will read and process each individual shipment that's in that and respond back according to each individual shipment that's on that record. The last one's kind of a cool hybrid AES web link. This acts kind of as a plug-in to your solutions that you might already have as part of your business. And so if you have an order system or an inventory system, what this could do is it pulls the data that you already have in some of your data sets into this. You then submit it to AES, and AES Direct will only ask you to submit those additional items that might not be part of your data set that you already have. So it's kind of a cool hybrid before you get into the second bucket that we call the direct connection to AES. And the second option there is really for larger companies who have obviously the infrastructure and the budget to create a direct connection to AES for sending that information in. Those kind of come in three different forms. You have your self-developed software, so you could utilize the business rules and requirements as they're laid out in the documentation for AES, and you could actually develop your own software to do those filings. We also have certified service centers and certified vendor software. Certified vendor software, think of it as like a commercial off the shelf that you'd be able to just purchase. You would then test with a client representative at CBP, and you would have that direct connection then to send your information there. Again, this is all just to get your information to AES. Nothing on AES side's changing. All of those edits and validations are the same. They'll just respond according to the message set that you send to the system. Okay, so preparing to file. So a lot of this is going to be just a review of what you've already heard this morning. One of the best resources, as Jerry talked about and is available back there for you to pick up a copy of, is our flipper. You'll notice the one that you see here is a different color. Every time that they change the regulations, the color changes on the flipper. So that's how you know if you have the most current one, which I think these are the most current, but don't hold me to that. Really, it's usually minor changes. If there's a big change, then that, obviously we'll promote that pretty hard. Another resource is the foreign trade regulations themselves. As Jerry said, they're not that large. They're also available in a PDF form. So if you ever have questions specific, Control Find's the best function ever created. And so you can just go and actually find the regulation that talks about that topic. And that's available online. If you are more of a person that likes to read through documentation, the whole thing of what we're doing today, talking about AES and the live demonstration is available online in this user guide. If you have training for new staff, it's a great resource to provide them because it does every single step of doing the filing in AES. We also have several different YouTube videos that are posted that walk you through the process of filing also. And those can be specific to, hey, I don't know how to file my commodities section. You could jump straight to the commodities section and not have to watch the full video. On the other side, if you do want a full video, again, incorporate it in a training program. We do have a full demonstration where we kind of do something similar to this presentation and a deeper dive into the system. The next thing, Mayumi's not here. So Mayumi, who's going next, she always makes fun of me because I like to bring the actual physical copy of the austere. It's crazy. The regulations are, I don't know how many pages, but it's a pretty small document. The austere is like this thick, and I have it in my bag if anybody's really interested. But the austere really is the Bible for AES. It's all of the business rules and requirements that are laid out in all of the different formats that are available for you to use. Okay. As a counselor for your small businesses, one of the best resources that I would encourage you, and also for filers that are here, is really this summary of changes. That's what we're going to highlight on this slide, and then we're going to dive into each of the other ones that are listed. Summary of changes captures any change that happens into the automated export system. A port of update gets uploaded. A new port comes online. That update would then be captured in the summary of changes. And that's the document that you could go to and say, hey, there's a new port, or hey, there's a new license type code that's available. There's a new response message that's just been incorporated, which leads us to Appendix A, which is our next slide. Appendix A is probably the #1 resource that's available to you as a filer, or to obviously the small businesses that might be filing on their behalf. Appendix A is the #1 resource for us at the call center. The first question that we are likely to ask you is, what is the response code that the system's giving back to you? Appendix A captures all of those response codes and keeps a log of them over time so that you know exactly how to resolve any message set that you might receive back from the system. And so some of the newest ones, we're always incorporating these new ones. Near and dear to Jerry's heart, something that he worked hard on, was that 26C that you see there. That's just a notification message that says, hey, your state of origin must match your USPPI. And so it's saying that this is a mismatch. You need to go back in the record and make the update. Anybody getting that one? That was pretty popular. It's probably one of the most popular codes that goes out right now. Again, it's a notification, and we'll talk about severities in a little bit, but that basically is just telling you, hey, this is something new that you need to address and kind of keep track of. 5C2 specific to State Department license information. This was specific to category 21. If there's any exporters of license information, that's a very specific category. So the State Department worked with Customs and Census to incorporate this new response message back. One that's kind of unique and hopefully will be a really valuable resource in the future is the 97H and 97R. If you've ever had your shipment placed on hold by a customs officer, this will improve that process, because the 97H is an opportunity for the customs officer to send an upfront notification back to the filer, telling them that their filing is on hold, and then allows you then to go make the appropriate corrections for them to allow you to move your goods. 97R, or H is the hold, R is obviously the release. Appendix D is the next really valuable resource that we always point people to. This provides you the full listing of valid export port codes and their allowable method of transportation for that port. So you can see here, one of the examples that we used to often do was for shipments that were leaving out of Miami, Florida on, let's say, a large carrier. So you're assuming that it's going air. If your carrier doesn't give you the information, which we've heard earlier, isn't always the greatest, we would point you to Appendix D as a good resource to start. You could go here to 5201. The clicker is not really highlighting it too much, but 5201 is for Miami, Florida. So you might look at that and say, hey, cool, 5201 is what I'm going to put in. The system's going to reject that because 5201 is not valid for air MOT. And so then you would need to go down the listing and say, okay, Miami International Airport is probably the most likely. We would tell you, go with that option and then reach out to the carrier to have them confirm your port of export. But it's a good resource to say, okay, this is valid for air, this is valid for rail. Again, Jerry's response or kind of comment earlier about Chicago being a rail port there. Tons of people used to get fines going out of Chicago because they would mark it as the rail port. If you just went to Appendix D, it will tell you not to do that, okay? Appendix F, so anybody ship licensable goods? Okay, so that's probably roughly accurate for the percentage in AES of how many licensed goods go out. It's very small in comparison to the large majority of the shipments. Appendix F is a really cool resource, though. It provides a matrix table for you. If you have a licensable shipment, it tells you exactly what the requirements are for that licensable good. And so in this case, you see the most common is the no license required, and that would be C33 at the top here. We at AES Direct would be able to auto-populate this so that you cannot make that mistake. We would put in NLR for you since we know that's a requirement. And then we would allow you to put in the ECCN number. We would not allow you to put this other license value here. If you drop down here for the C63, again, we could do this, but then you have to put in that mandatory ECCN. This actually gives you a listing of those that are allowed for that specific license type code. This one allows any of them. This one has to be one of these options. Some of them kind of have like a hybrid of what is allowed or not allowed. But in any case, Appendix F really kind of outlines and gives you a really good matrix as to what the requirements are for each specific license type code. This one didn't. That's the problem with PDFs, I guess. So, question is trivia time because we don't really have any. I like AES as a system doesn't have any gray area. Regulations is all gray. You got to figure every situation out as they come in. If it's not in the austere, you can't do it. It's really cut and dry for us. And so we don't really do knowledge checks. It's more trivia time. But does anybody know, without looking, if you have your laptop open, you're cheating, what letter of the alphabet is not currently used in the austere? I'll give you a little hint. Does anybody know why that might be? Why? Okay, there it is. So why? And really, there's no logical reason behind it, except for that very thing is you might get confused if you're talking about it. The next one is, anybody know what the two most recent letters are in the appendix? This is really just an excuse for us to talk about the newest data elements that come in, but anybody? All right, so Appendix X and Q. And what these are specific to our partnership government agencies who have been trying to incorporate their data requirements into the automated export system. So those outdated paper documents that they might have required at the port, they're trying to incorporate that through the process in AES. Appendix Q gives you those record formats specific to, you got to provide this type of license. This is how long that license string can be. These are the characters that are allowed. You can put in alphanumeric. You can't put in these special characters, that type of stuff. Appendix X is another cool resource, though. And that really breaks down each partnership government agency and it tells you what specific Schedule B or HTS codes are required for that agency or allowed for that agency to be reported. On that note, anybody use or use self-propelled vehicles? Appendix U? No, okay. So self-propelled vehicles is another big one. Appendix U is another resource that's available in that long listing. And that gives you a full listing of the Schedule B codes for used vehicles. And then it also identifies which ones require the VIN or PIN number as part of the filing to meet the Customs and Border Protection regulatory requirement for used vehicles. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, so the partnership government agencies. And we used to have a detailed slide on that. We did purposely take that out because the regulatory requirements that they were going through to get approval to do this, several of them kind of were in a standstill with that. And so we just list out, I would point you there, and they have a listing of what the most recent partnership government agencies are in that process and their status of if they're collecting it or if they're kind of at a standstill. Any other questions? Austere, preparing to file. Good deal. So Jerry had asked earlier if we were going to talk about the internal transaction number, and that's what we're going to cover here as the AES responses. We broke them into two categories. It's pretty easy, elementary, like green is go, red is stop, right? So anything in the green, you're getting that internal transaction number. And in addition to that, you can also receive several of these other types of response messages with your internal transaction number. So the second option there is your filing cannot move under these conditions. That's the shipment was either rejected. So you tried to create the filing in the automated export system. AES did its edits and validations and said, no, you're missing critical data elements that are required in order to ship your goods out. Again, AES Direct, as a web portal, we try to limit that based on the functionality we can build in the system. But if you have a self-developed software, you might just be missing certain data elements that are required. There is a second part to that, though, is that you could actually file in the system, get your internal transaction number, and then go back in and make a correction based on something that your customer asked you to change. That then creates a fatal error. The ITN that you received or your filing citation that you received is no longer valid. So you cannot move that good at that point or that shipment. And you have to go back into the system and make the correction in the automated export system. Is that clear? So you could get an ITN that still then becomes invalid later. But most of the times it's just the upfront, you don't get an ITN for the shipment. If you ever run into a situation where you don't get an ITN, we can look into the back end of that for you if you need us to see what that data element might be that you're missing, in addition to the response message that the system will send back to you. So let's start with the easy one, since the fatal errors are the really only red no-go path. And that is a good example here that we have is for fatal 120. You'll see it on the left-hand side. I know it's pretty small on the screen. But what we're saying there is that the carrier is unknown. So that response code that I mentioned earlier that we would ask for, that's what we're talking about. Fatal error 130, that tells us to go to the Appendix A. We can look at 120, sorry, and because it'll say carrier unknown. These are the ways to resolve that. Obviously, in this case, it's pretty cut and dry. We're basically just telling you that we looked at the reference file that we have on hand for SCAC or IATA codes. This code did not appear, so it's invalid. So you have to then go back, either use an unknown code that you then need to update later, or you need to find a valid SCAC code that you can put on the record and file. So the correct actions, according to the regulations 30.9, you are required to actually make the update to the record. To Jerry's point earlier too, do not just create a new record. Oftentimes that happens and they'll call us and say, hey, I got a fatal error, but I just created a new shipment with the new shipment reference number just because I need to get my goods out. Well, that's fine, but then you have to either cancel the other one. And in order to cancel the other one, for the system to process it, you have to correct the other one. So it's just double work on that part, where you could have just corrected the initial one and been good to go with an ITN number. They have to be corrected, again, to be valid. Pre-departure, we'll talk a little bit about what's the difference if there's post-departure, but pre-departure filers have to make that correction prior to their goods leaving. And then we again refer, Appendix A is the best resource for all of these messages that you would receive back. Compliance alert examples. So this is another really popular one. In this particular case, you can see we actually put it at the top. We don't put it at the location of where the error occurred. In this one, though, it says compliance alert 700. Your shipment was reported late. Option 2. So option 2 indicates that pre-departure, you're sending your information in prior to your export leaving. And so what the system just knows, hey, you put the date of export as being September 4th. It's September 5th? Is that right? Today's September 5th. So now your shipment is late because you reported it a day after you said that it left. That's all the system knows. It doesn't know any kind of human error. So if you fat fingered that, system doesn't know it. It's still going to ask you or tell you that you were wrong and you need to go make the correction. Yes, Patrick. Okay.
Delayed even though vessel name is the same.
Do you need to update the vessel?
Vessel ETD.
Yes. So if you learn from the carrier that your information needs to be updated, you have to go in and update that record. Again, hopefully once we get down the line with the manifest, the electronic manifest, that won't be the case. But for now, if you're notified by your carrier that the information has been updated for your transportation statistics in particular, you need to go back in and make the corrections to the record. To put in really kind of insightful terms is, if it's at the end of the month and your shipment then moved to the next month, well, statistically, we only want to capture that at the 1 month period, not the next month, so that we don't have to then make that correction in future data sets that we publish. Was that the only one? Q&A, good. Any other questions on compliance alerts?
Is there a limit on the amount of corrections that you can do?
Good question. So is there an amount or a limit on the amount of corrections that you can do in the system? No, other than how many officers will be knocking at your door, probably. No, and that even, I say that jokingly, but from a census perspective, we want the right data. We want to publish the right thing. And so, no, there is no limit to how many you can correct. I will talk a little bit later about how it will impact you as far as the compliance reports that we send out. But no, the system won't limit you on how many corrections you make. And then oftentimes in the case of a VSD that might come into regs, it might be a systemic issue that's been going on for years, and they're going to have to go in and make updates to thousands and thousands of records. I don't know, what's the largest you might have seen, Jerry?
10,000.
There you go. Do you imagine being the person who made that mistake? Okay, so compliance alerts. The right thing to do for a compliance alert is to adjust your filing practices so that you don't do it again in the future. That's the kind of the simplest way of putting that. Common causes usually are for late filings. So maybe you were out on Friday because you took the day off and you were the one doing the filings for the company. You come back in on Monday and it turns out that they shipped something out on Friday. Okay, document. In all of these cases, document everything you can related to any responses that you get back, especially in the case that a customer might be responsible for making those changes. And that's really what we're talking about on that second bullet there under the common causes is changing critical shipment information. Again, you as the filer might be correctly inputting what you're being told, but the client might tell you, hey, we need to update the US PPI. Well, that's critical, okay? Or we need to update the license information. We need to add or delete a commodity line. All of those types of things are going to cause a compliance alert that basically are just slapping you on the wrist to say, hey, that's not a best practice to do your filing. You can't continue doing that in the future. That's really what a compliance alert is telling you to do. Adjust your filing practices so that it's not reoccurring in the future. And then the last bullet we covered, account for everything with documentation. Warning messages are probably the most simple type of message that you would receive back. There used to only be one, and personally, there's only one warning message that I care about, and those are for shipments that are sold en route. Sold en route shipments, I think we might have touched a little bit on the regulations presentation about that, but these might be shipments of grain that need to go, but you don't know who's purchasing them yet, right? So you send them out on the vessel, you mark it as being sold en route. After it's already in sale, you might find your foreign buyer. Then you go back into the record and you update who the buyer of that good is at that point. You'll see here, this is an example of what you would see if you went into Appendix A. So it's going to give you, it'll actually have another segment above this that tells you the response code. It'll give you something we call the narrative text. So it's telling you what's wrong with it. And then it gives you the severity. And then the best part is down at the bottom, the reason and resolution. Why did you get the error? How do you fix it, or who do you contact in order to fix it? So this is a good example of what you see in Appendix A. In this case, you have to report that data within 4 days. If you do not, the system's just going to update you on a weekly basis to then go in and make the correction and update it to show who the ultimate consignee is. If you don't know, after several weeks, you're probably going to have other problems other than the system sending you alerts anyways. So this one's easy. We cover what the proper actions are. Verify messages. Anybody get verify messages? I'm sure everybody. These are probably the most popular type of messages that go back from the system. These are all based and established on what Patrick had gone through earlier. Those set parameters that are in the system that tell you, hey, this shipment seems kind of quirky, right? So in this case, this particular Schedule B is, I think, some kind of like metals or something. But I used to like the example of you were sending coffee, and you might mark it as being like 2 kilograms would be your unit of measure. And then you're saying the value is, call it even $1,000. Well, the system might say, hey, we're not telling you that you're wrong, that you have the world's most expensive coffee, but we're asking you to check it and make sure that it is the best coffee ever, right? And so that's all that a warning message or a verify message is doing. It's asking you to look at the data. If it's correct, then that's fine. You don't have to take any further action. If it's not correct, then we ask you obviously to make the correction and resubmit the filing so that it's updated in the system. Then that alleviates Patrick's job. He doesn't have to call you and verify what you put in the system earlier was right. Informational messages are exactly that. They're for your information. The most common version of informational is what you see on the screen here, and that's for license information. So this is telling you an informational 591. The remaining value on your license is this value that's reported here. This is a really good clue, though, into kind of just some internal auditing for your company. If you do have license shipments, that gives you, hey, that looks right. Yep, our value should be about that. Or, oh, no, that's not right. Somebody must have already keyed this record in, which happens a lot, where people have duplicate shipments that have the exact same value under a license. Then they have to go in and make the correction and update that. So it's really good for, again, internal auditing purposes to keep track of what's going on with your license. The other example would be if it shows as being close to 0, then you know you need to go get a new license, right? You should know that, especially keeping good track of your license information. But in the case you weren't, this will tell you. So proof of filing citation. So what do you put on the record? We got all the data into the system. The system responded back with any of those response codes. What else does it give you? It gives you the most critical thing that you want to put on your records, and that's the internal transaction number, or your ITN number. So your ITN number is shown here for pre-departure filers, which is probably roughly 99.9% of filers now. The example that you would show is the X, the year, the month, the day, and then 6 randomly generated digits by the system after that. Don't try to make up your own. We've had people do that and they are caught like that. It does validate them, obviously, at some process in the system. Post-departure filers. So if you are fortunate enough to be one of those few couple hundred companies that are post-departure filers at this point, if you are a USPPI doing the filing, you would just mark it as AES post. Your USPPI ID, those approvals were done at the full 11 characters, so including the 2-digit suffix. And then the date of export. This will look familiar in a second for another slide. If you're an authorized agent that's filing on behalf of a USPPI, which I think we said earlier, we only have the one forwarder here. So if you're filing on behalf of a USPPI that was approved for option 4, you can do that filing. You would put their information in and then your filer ID in afterwards with the date marked. Any questions on your proof of filing? Yep, we got one online. Go ahead, Patrick.
Okay, it was noted earlier in a routed transaction, the USPPI only needs to file the 10 data elements we are responsible for providing when the FPPI's broker is filing AES routed transaction. When is this the case? And if it comes back, AES was filed incorrectly by the FPPI's broker who's liable for the penalty. Is that more for Jerry?
I would ask Customs who's liable for that penalty. I mean, would we provision who it is? We have the front mic on.
It doesn't work?
Thanks.
There we go. Let's make sure that the person asking the question isn't thinking that the USPPI has to actually file in AES those 12 data elements. They don't actually have to file them. They're responsible for them. So the agent working on behalf of the foreign principal party in interest is the filer, but the USPPI has to give in their instructions to that agent those 12 data elements. If there is a violation, whoever is responsible for each of the data elements per 30.3 of the foreign trade regulations is most likely going to be the one Customs or officer or special agent goes after.
Good deal. Thank you, Jerry. Hopefully that clears it up. If not, they can circle back with us. You have a question?
The USPPI ID, you said that's an 11-digit number every time? You said it had a suffix on it. Is that the same as like our filer ID, or is that different than?
Yeah, so your USPPI ID typically is going to be the same as your filer ID. Only in this particular post-departure citation will we ask for those last 2 characters. So those could be identifying if you have companies with different subsidiaries, they would have the different suffix at the end, often with the state code or something. The way the approvals were done at the option 4 status were all the way, like we would approve your company at your location. We might not approve your company at the Texas location, right? But when you're doing your filing in the automated export system, more often than not, it's referred to as the filer ID, and that's your 9-character code. Typically is the same as your USPPI ID without the suffix at the end. But when you do your filing, remind me when we get in if I don't cover it. When you do your filing, you can actually report a full 11. So if you want to report it specific to a subsidiary or a location, you can do that in the system also. You report either the 9 or the 11. If you report 9, we'll backfill the 00 at the end, basically.
Just so you know, the 10th and 11th, they're not assigned. You assign those in case you do have multiple subsidiaries. So a lot of large companies like to know where the goods are originating from the different states that their subsidiaries are in. So you take a large company like General Electric, they're everywhere. So that's why they use the last 2 digits, usually with the state code. Some of them have multiple companies in the state. So they actually give their number, they give numbers to those last 2, like 01, 02, 03, etc.
Which then I'm sure makes it really fun when you hear about Mayumi's presentation, when they start looking at reports, making sure that people who should have access to the data get access to the data. And of course, the most important of not getting access if you're not. Okay, so obviously we all know systems fail. We've all been on websites when they've went down, and it's so frustrating. And the same thing happens to us. And trust me, it's more frustrating for us because we get all the calls, and we also at the same time are working with Customs to identify the issue and to resolve that. Obviously, like I had said earlier, it's their system that they own and maintain. So they're the ones doing the technical work. And then we're kind of the, the forward facing punching bag for the clients calling in, basically. When your system is down, though, it just breaks into two categories again. When your system is down, that's when I talked earlier about it's critical to have an AES Direct account. Because one of the avenues for you to continue filing, even if your system is down, is utilizing AES Direct. Okay. If let's say though, maybe your system is down, meaning like your whole infrastructure at your business is down. You have no internet access. Maybe you were hit with a cyber attack, right? And you can't get access into any of that. We've had situations like that where you then are required to still complete the filings, but you have the option of using obviously an authorized agent, which is always an option available to anybody doing filings. But if you're a larger company in that category, one of the other suggestions that we would make is having a subsidiary or a sister company do those filings on your behalf. Maybe they can do the filing, in which case they become the authorized agent. So they would have to make sure all the filing information is in there correctly. But maybe it's isolated to your specific location. You would still be able to have it done without then going to a third party to do the filings. Again, several different options if your system is down. But if you're going to call us and say that your system's down, we need to use a downtime citation, we're just going to tell you you're out of luck and your goods are not moving at that point, because there's other options to do it. When our side is down, either AES or AES Direct is down. So the avenue, one of the methods to submit your information to AES, or the AES system who actually does the processing and stores is down, then you'll be notified by a nationwide broadcast email directly from my office that sends that out to say, hey, we've recently made improvements in the last few years where it used to be you got an email just said, hey, the system's down. We're going to do downtime citation. And then, hey, system's back up. You can start submitting your information. Now we've broken it into 4 to try to be a little bit more friendly. We say, hey, the system's having issues. As soon as you guys identify, because really we're in the system often helping, but you as the exporters or your clients as the exporters are really the front line letting us know when there's issues with the system. And so we take that information. If we're getting several calls, we'll put up an auto reply on our email. We'll send out this nationwide broadcast and we'll say, hey, there's system issues right now. We're aware of them. We're working with customs to resolve them. And if the system continues for, it's a well-documented process of how long. People often ask, how long does the system have to be down? It's got to be at least 2 hours for us to initiate downtime policy, right? And that's written out in the procedures from Customs and Border Protection. It's an agreement that's mutually agreed. Census and Customs agree. Yes, we are going to go into downtime. And what that allows you to do is to start moving some of your goods under a downtime citation. And I said earlier, the option 4 would look similar. The downtime citation is written here. So it's AES down. So this is what you would put in place of your internal transaction number. You would put AES down, your filer ID, and then date of export. That would allow you then to move your goods out of the country at that time. Then the requirement would be that you go in and you make those filings after the fact. So that's that 4th email that we send. We tell you there's issues with the system. The system's in downtime policy now. This is how you file your goods, or this is how you move your cargo rather. The system is back online. Please go and submit. And then we'll follow up the next day and say, hey, please remember to go in and file all those shipments that you moved the previous day under the downtime citation. Now you get to the bolded section. Shipments that are subject to ITAR, whether they're exempt, ITAR exempt, or licensed from the State Department, cannot be moved. This is probably the most common call that we get and frustration on these days is people that are sitting at the tarmac with their shipment ready to leave and they cannot go because they haven't done their filing. Does anybody remember from Jerry's presentation what the filing timeframes are? Air is like 2 hours, I think, for non-ITAR is a specific, and I think it's 4 hours. So basically, you're telling me at that point that you didn't do your filing on time if you have an ITAR shipment in particular. And so really, at the two hour mark, if it's an air shipment, you really should have already had your filings done and completed anyways. But we understand the frustration of not being able to file in the system in a timely perspective. Yep. We had another question online.
So it's this is a follow-up to the first question, Jerry. Yeah. To clarify, the US PPI does not always get the AES filing from the FPPI's broker. So could you clarify why would the US PPI be liable for the fine if we are not receiving the AES filing to review? And if we do get the AES filing and it's incorrect, and I've asked multiple times for the AES file to be corrected with no luck, who is liable for the penalty?
So under the regulations, the 12 data elements are the ownership of the US PPI. Any of those 12 are in violation of any of the government agency regulations. The enforcement officer, again, is going to look at all parties to the transaction, but they're going to actually go to the one that has ownership for those data elements. So in this case, if the Schedule B number is incorrect or the ECCN number is incorrect, and those are both data elements that the US PPI is responsible for, most likely the penalty is going to be issued to the US PPI. Okay.
Thanks, Jerry. Thanks, Patrick. Okay, so the last two bullets here we've already covered, just to hit them. You have to maintain a log of those movements that happened under the downtime citation. And then we will notify you again to go ahead and start submitting that information once the system is back online. Again, you'll be notified specific to this is an AES issue or this is an AES direct issue. And we'll be clear about that in the response or in the messaging that we send out. So what better time than now to sign up for our subscription? So I'll give you two options. You can either scan the QR code, subscribe to our list. Again, that's a list that sends updates like training opportunities like this, but most importantly, any kind of updates that happen to the automated export system. I mentioned earlier the summary of changes. Most likely anything that's going in the summary of changes is going to warrant us to send a broadcast email out to tell you, hey, this change is happening. So really, it's kind of isolated to those. Any AES updates, there is a separate list for training opportunities and then the broadcast email. If you don't want to scan the QR code, but you still want to be part of the list, I'll offer to drop your business card back with me and just write on there AES broadcast list, and I will get you uploaded into that system. Okay, so to the question earlier about how many can you do in the system. So one way that we help or try to promote compliance is by sending out something we call the AES compliance reports. And this is a monthly report that goes out. If you are a filer that's here today, you're not receiving a compliance report or your company is not, then I would ask you to reach out to me separately and we can kind of work through that and make sure that the correct person is getting that. Obviously, with turnover constantly happening, we're always making updates to the system to make sure the right people are getting these reports. You know, mom always said you want an A+, right? So you want 100%. So that's our goal too. You want to get 100% compliance, but all that tells us is that you know how to manipulate the system, right? That doesn't mean that you're right. What you're putting into AES is correct. It just means you know how to pass the edits and validations. So shipments that are found out of compliance are obviously subject to fines, penalties, and seizures. Fines is a new one, huh? The compliance then is actually accompanied also by something we call the fatal error reports. They are similar in the formatting, but they're specific to only those outstanding fatal errors that happen for your company. So that really is just kind of like, if you get one of those, you better start making corrections in the system to get rid of them and clear them out. The compliance reports, we always say it's a snapshot of your company, another good resource for internal auditing purposes. It tells you specifically, hey, this is how many shipments that you sent last month. This is how many compliance alerts that were generated. This is how many fatal errors were generated, and the other message sets. But the compliance rate itself is just based on fatal errors and compliance alerts. So if you have a lot of compliance corrections, that's obviously going to impact your compliance alert for that month period. There is a specific formula. It's not just as simple as taking them and putting them in. So if you're interested in that, we'll send you to our math stats and they can help you figure that out. Fatal error reports, like I mentioned, they're specific to those fatal errors. They come every other month. So the compliance alert comes the second Tuesday of the month. Fatal error report would come every other Tuesday in the month if you still have compliant or fatal errors that are outstanding for your company. We do have a team that's specifically assigned to fatal errors and resolving those with companies. And so I'd encourage you to reach out to that address that's listed there especially for shipments that maybe you're trying to make the correction to, but for some reason you just can't figure it out. The system, or we would be able to go in and make a suppression request in the system and have that shipment hidden from the report then, so it doesn't keep nagging you for making that error or that change. Another question online?
Yes. So is the AAS compliance report available to forwarders that process EEI through their own operating software as opposed to the AES website?
So that's a really loaded question because according to the foreign trade regulations, you're only supposed to be filing EEI records in the United States, physically in the US. So if you're a foreign company making filings overseas, that's another issue. Hopefully that answers the question, maybe. Yeah. Did we get a follow-up? That was quick.
They are located in the US.
Oh, so they're a foreign individual, but they're located in the US? So if you write into a specific to that, we'll take that offline and we can answer you back. But kind of like a high level is you should only be filing if you're in the US. That's written clear as day in the regulations. And then it wouldn't matter as long as you're the one doing the filing, the report will be sent to the person doing the filing, not to, like in the case you have an authorized agent, it wouldn't go to the USPPI, it would go to the authorized agent because they're the ones doing the filing. So the last part then, if you have a massive amount of compliance alerts or you have a lot of fatal errors, whether they're systematic or if they're a user error, because we capture those rates, we actually analyze them monthly, and we have something we call the compliance review program, where we work with trade regulations branch, our microanalysis branch, and sometimes other areas in census where we will identify a particular set of companies and we'll actually reach out and work with them on addressing the issues they have. We used to physically go to locations, obviously in the new age, we just kind of have Teams calls with them. But it's really kind of a one-on-one. We're working directly with that company because, again, as a statistical agency, we just want to put out the best data that we can. And the only way to do that is to get the best data from the filer. And so that's what this program really kind of hones in on, those low performers, and asks them to adjust those business and filing practices. I see you smiling. Must have another online question.
Yes, another one. How does the USPPI get an AES compliance report if they have authorized a forwarder to file EEI on their behalf?
Yeah, so they will never get a compliance report if they authorize the filer to do it. So compliance reports only go to the individual or the company that's doing the filing. I think maybe what they're interested in is the next subject they'll be talking about is the AES compliance, or the ACE export reports is what Mayumi will cover. And that's an opportunity that they might be able to look at what filings were done and what data amounts they have access to at that point. So finish up the slide deck and then we can kind of go through quickly. You'll see what time it is, but this is my information. This is the trade data collection branch as a whole, the information available. If you have any kind of general questions related to AES or response messages, you can reach us directly there. System improvements too, I'll solicit that. If you guys have system improvements that you think we should build in, send them our way. We would love to work with customs to try to get those incorporated in the system also. What time we got here? All right, I think we have time. Mayumi is just usually not super long. So let me jump out and I will show you what the actual user interface is. Anybody actually use AES Direct? Okay, a couple in the back. Anybody use ACE? Do they go in through the automated commercial environment? Yep. So ACE obviously is now changed. If you had previously gone into ACE, it's now under a new modernized portal. They're continuing to roll that out. And that's something you'll probably see a lot of communication from Customs and Border Protection about, is they're going to continue to make improvements to that ACE portal. And again, incorporating all these different systems, trying to streamline the import and export process as a whole. What you see here is actually our training environment for AES Direct. So that's why you see that big orange banner at the top. But if you were doing a filing, you would go in, you would select your company in ACE, and then you would go in to submit AES Direct filing. And it'll bring you into this really nice user interface, right? So different things about this. If you have multiple filer IDs, multiple companies that you create filings for, you'll have an option here as the drop-down menu. So this filer ID that I have listed, you'd be able to drop that down and select the appropriate company that you're doing the filing for. In our case, we only have one EIN number that we use to do our filings. Step one, we've broken in the shipment down into 4 different parts. So you have the shipment information, that's usually transportation information, or I'm sorry, that's shipment information like where it's going, what's the date of export, where is it leaving from the state. So this first one's pre-populated. You obviously have to key in your shipment reference number. We talked earlier about the different options for post-departure and pre-departure filings. In our case, we are pre-departure filing. We're saying that our shipment is leaving out of, or by air, leaving out of Nashville. I didn't check myself. Is Nashville an airport? Does anybody know Appendix A or D? It is? Okay, so hopefully then we won't get any errors at the end of this. You can see here, as I talked earlier about us being able to build in some upfront editing in the system. This is an example of it right here. Port of unlading is not listed because it's not a requirement for air shipments, except when. This one's for a Starbucks gift card. So if you guys get this one, it's a real deal. When is the port of unlading required for an air shipment? No takers? I think it's real. They told me it was real. You got a guess in the back. Post-departure filings? Nope. That was close. It starts with a P. It's a territory. We collect Puerto Rico. I think there's a lot of you that said that down. Sorry. All right. Mayumi's going to have cards to give away. So yeah, so shipments to Puerto Rico have specific requirements for those different transactions. And so that's one example of a difference, that most shipments that go via air don't require port of unlading, but any of those that are going to Puerto Rico do then require that. The departure date. So one of the questions I skipped over earlier, compliance alerts, late filings is the biggest one. Another specific time of year, we get a lot of compliance alerts for late filing. When might that be? What was it? The end of, well, not fiscal year, but the end of calendar year. That's right. Yeah. So in the calendar year, we get a ton of them because people just key in the old year, right? And so the system doesn't know any better. Again, the system is just looking at, this is what's required, this is what you entered, right? So here it makes it a little bit easier because we put in the calendar, we automatically select the date for you, and you just pick out the date that you need. All of these are dynamic searches. So if you start keying data in here, it's going to start changing it for you. So if you start doing South, it'll change that. In this case, we're just selecting Tennessee. Country of destination, same dynamic search there. We're listing it as Japan. To Jerry's point earlier that he mentioned, your original ITN that's provided. You need me, Jay? You got another question?
You're not sharing that screen.
Ah, it's a mystery. How well did I describe what I was talking about? So, new share. There we go. Hopefully you all at home. I apologize for that. Sorry about that. You didn't miss much, I promise. So we're still on step one, and this is what we kind of started with. I had gone through these different topics at the top. The one that I was just getting ready to talk about is down here, this original ITN. So Jerry had talked about those split shipment opportunities that happen. You would be able to put in your original ITN in this new data field. So that's something that we worked with Customs to get that built into the system after that requirement came live a few years back. The other ones are just toggle buttons. So the routed transaction. Does anybody know the threshold for, are the US PPI and the ultimate consignee companies related? How much do you have to own of the overseas company in order to be related to that company? More than 10%. Who said it? 20? Oh, Jesus, gave you correct. 10%. Yeah, so it's 10%. The other one there, we don't use statistically, but it's probably pretty important for Customs. Is it hazardous material? They would like to know that before they go looking at your shipment. The party information. So before I do that, real quick, the top you see a tools menu here. this gives you access. You can have the shipment manager, which we'll get to at the end, but it gives you party profiles, template managers, and then the bulk filing that I talked about earlier would be under that tools menu. The two big ones though are the party profile manager and the template manager. If you have a template, you can create a template for a shipment that maybe you have a specific shipment that you send every month to the same client. You'd be able to create a template, and in which case we would only require you to make updates to specific data elements that we would expect to change from month to month. We're going to make you add the value, the quantity, the weight, things like that, that we think, okay, it's not, this isn't going to be the exact same shipment, but things that are going to be, that are going to remain the same, we can let those stay. The US PPI is going to be the same. The same is true there for the party profile without us stripping any data. If you create a party, we'll put all that information and then you can load it. Once you go to step 2 in this party screen, you can just click here, load from profile, and then select the party that you're going to be sending it to. Apparently mine doesn't have any. And I'll say this now, I don't know this is going to let me actually submit the shipment because the timeout on the session when I logged in earlier. So yes, ma'am.
You said if you have greater than 2% ownership of a foreign company, then what?
To the ultimate consignee. So on step 1 here is the toggle button down at the bottom that asks you if you are related companies. Right here are the US PPI and the ultimate consignee. So if that specific company you're sending to, you own 10% or more of that company, you would be marking as yes, you're related. Oh no, what's it doing here? What'd I do? All right, I'm gonna stop sharing because it's not doing this. Let me. I'm gonna jump back here and share this presentation again because I think that the session timed me out on that. But at the end of the presentation, like I had mentioned before, we do have these screenshots that kind of go through exactly what we were able to do in a live environment there. So the second step would be this party information. Again, you have the option to load from a profile, which we had done on the previous screen. In addition to the US PPI, there's 4 parties that are mentioned on this screen. Your US PPI is a required party. Your ultimate consignee is going to be a required party. Jerry talked about in his presentation, the consignee type. I'll just highlight that's another one that we had to add into this data set that's available there in a dropdown. This is also where we talked about that sold en route option. We would allow you just to hit that toggle button that it's sold en route. We would automatically populate the data that's the system requires for you to input. And then you would just be required then to put in, I believe that it's just the country that it's going to, because we still require it to know what country it's supposed to be going to at that point. And then there's 2 other parties at the bottom of that that are not shown in these slides, and that's going to be your intermediate consignee and freight forwarder information. So if you are an authorized agent, we are hopefully very soon going to be changing the language that it shows there in the bottom of this that says freight forwarder to then read authorized agent, because really that's what we're after. And that's what's written in the regulations, is that we want the authorized agent, meaning that you're filing on behalf of the US PPI or the FPPI at that point. And so those 2 parties are not shown here, but they are available on that party screen: intermediate consignee and the authorized agent information. And then the step 3 you'll see, and this is where it's usually a little nicer to go into the live demonstration of it, but step 3 is your commodity information. And so we break it into the export information code. Based on that code, we can then start graying out other fields. You'll see first quantity, first unit of measure are all grayed out. If we were to key in an active valid Schedule B number, those fields would adjust to what they need to be based on the reference tables that we have in the back end. And so if it's a used vehicle, for instance, we would populate that area and say, hey, okay, this is a used vehicle. It shows up in our reference data. You need to now provide us the VIN or PIN information for that Schedule B code. If a Schedule B requires 2 units of measure. So if I think there used to be one, I think it was like gloves was a very unique one that required a quantity in dozen pair and also in kilograms or something like that. So if it requires 2, then it'll show you 2. If it only requires 1, we'll limit it to make it so you can only provide us 1 instead of giving us more than that. I just want to check. I am sharing this current screen, right? Okay, perfect. Okay, so we had talked a little bit earlier about the origin of goods. You would indicate that here in this dropdown as domestic or foreign. The value would be reported here as the actual value of the shipment. A separate section would populate if you do have licensable shipments. You would put in the license type code. You would then select, for instance, if it was a State Department, S05. And then based on that, the system would then require additional data elements. You'd be required to put in your DDTC eligibility number, your licensable value, so a value that's actually getting shipped on that particular shipment against the value of the license. And then the additional data elements that are required per, the specific license type code that you're using. And commodity lines, you may know, here's another shit. I'm really giving you guys chances to make the $10 Starbucks card or whatever. How many commodity lines can you add to a single filing? There it is. That's it. Winner, winner, chicken dinner or coffee dinner, something. There you go. Congratulations. I really hope that works for you. Okay. So yeah, 999 lines you could add to a single shipment, which is obnoxious if you ask me, but some people do it. So you would just simply add that line here, and then it'll kind of show you in an Excel format once you go back each of the lines that you have added. Again, the system is going to read each of those lines for those different requirements. And in the case you might have that many, it's going to respond to each one of those. So if you have issues, you're going to have to go through and find the issues. The system will tell you there's a little like key on the right of which ones have issues and maybe a high level what the response code would be, but you will have to go in and make updates and adjustments to each of those. The last section here is our transportation section. And so this is, in this case, all grayed out, and that's likely because we marked it as being maybe a hand carried, something like that. But typically, if you're sending something in the main modes of transportation, these data fields would be open, and you would need to populate them with either your SCAC or IATA code. Again, those validate based on a reference data we have. The conveyance or carrier name, that is an open text field with certain limits, but that one we don't validate the names because you can always kind of fat finger a name, and that's reasonably acceptable. And then the transportation reference number, again, those are required for vessel shipments. They are allowed for air shipments, but if you do report them for air shipments, they have to be in a specific format. So just pay attention to that if you do. And then what would happen after you keyed in your transportation data and you had all of your data in there correctly, you would go down and click on this submit filing button. And what the system does, it actually processes your shipment like live time. And right then, if your shipment's good to go, it'll give you a pop-up window right there on the screen with your internal transaction number. So you can take your ITN right from that and you can put it on your docs that you need to ship your goods and you're good to go. You could also go into an option to do a print view, and that'll give you kind of a clean version of the printout of what's, all the data that you just provided to the system. But in the case that you're filing for USPPI, you want to give them a proof of filing, you might be able to do that. I think that's it though. Yeah. Any questions? Any more online? Okay, we do have one question in the back. Does someone want to throw him a mic or hand it to him? Yes, so real quick, let me address this. So we'll be uploading the presentation. Absolutely. So I think, Jay, you had sent out the link, right, for all the presentations?
Yes.
Is that available? So if you don't have it, we can get it afterwards. Yeah. Oh, probably not in the app. It's a separate is it from Export Trade? Yep, there you go. So it's not in the app for ASPDC, but it will be, we can get it for you afterwards if you just talk with Jay. Okay, yes, sir.
Yeah, so my question's on the step 3 commodities.
Mhm.
We our company has it set up to where it automatically pulls the 10-digit HTS description, and we get other a lot there. So we get a fatal error. I was just curious as what maybe you guys suggest to do
You get other for your Schedule B?
for the description, the commodity description.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, so I would suggest putting in what the actual description is of the commodity, not to sound a slight about it, but so that's a problem. That's why we limit, there's certain things, PO boxes was another one. There's certain words that we don't allow. We don't allow PO boxes, so we won't allow that string of characters to be reported or unknown for a certain case. So if you put transportation is a good example of that. You can put in a code, if you don't know your SCAC code, you can put in UNK in, and the system reads that as a valid SCAC code because sometimes there might be a delay in getting a SCAC code, okay? But if you then try to put in unknown as your carrier name, the system's gonna say, no, and that's not allowed. Like, there's no way you don't know your carrier name or your SCAC code. You might just be trying to work around the system. So there's certain things like that that we won't allow. So if it's other, we would just want more description, and you could call the commodities folks and say, because I mean, how would it be classified as just other? If that was what's pulled from the Schedule B thing?
That's at the 10-digit level. So once you get all the way down to the 10-digit level of it, it's the final description will be other.
Uh-huh.
And that's what we have pulling into the.
So
into
I
the
would
system.
say if they could program it to pull what the parent code, what would you do, Patrick? Would you pull at the 2 character or would you pull at the 6? And then you could put in other at the end of that. That's how I would program it.
Okay, awesome. That's what we were kind of looking at doing. So
Yeah.
I just want to verify that with somebody. Thank you.
Yeah, and you could ask, I would recommend you contact your port and ask the officer there, because that's who's really wanting to look. They want to know what's in the box, the container, right? Other is an issue because they don't know what they're opening. So I would ask them what they want the description maybe to be. As far as statistically, we'll pull the description and we can do the hierarchical like layers to know what product it is. If you're sending a piano, that's a grand piano other because it's small, we can know that. But CBP doesn't know that at the port. That's if you have a port they use specifically to use all the time. If not, you could ask the headquarters and we could get you contact for that. They'll be on the panel later, but I'm not sure Valerie would want to answer that. Yeah.
I just want to add to that. Do not use the Schedule B description as your commodity description. Use your commercial description. The regulations ask for the commercial description. The reason for that is Patrick and his staff give you assistance on what number it's under. It doesn't actually mean that the description of your commodity is going to be what that displays under its Schedule B. In other words, if you have some type of laptop or something, you may say a laptop, but it's going to say what? Data processing machine or something? Yeah. So say what it is, not what the Schedule B is actually putting in there for you. And that really helps the officers when they're trying to verify what the actual commodity is.
Great. Thanks, Jerry. Any other questions? Sure. Yeah, so I would request them to not to, because really what happens then from so the question, sorry, I'll repeat it for the question, is if you completed your filing and then you went in to create your label on UPS, you mark this is your filing, and then they also create an EEI record and provide you an ITN for the shipment you already created. What should be the process of that after that? So think about it from a statistical perspective, then we have 2 records that show the same thing. And so that's inflating that number, which we don't want. So yeah, absolutely. I would be leery as to how they can create that record without all the data from you. So I would ask them to stop doing that as a practice. And that's something, I mean, that's probably a small example, but if there was like a habitual filer doing that, because there are cases where that happens, I would recommend reaching out to Jerry's team, because they would get on a 3-way call with them and kind of explain what the requirements are, and especially in that case, what they're not supposed to be doing. Any other questions? Very good. So I'll point you back, all the contact information. I know it was asked about the slides. The slides are available. And then the contact information for each of us is actually on this. This is a great resource. This also is a great resource. I know there's a lot of people kind of trickling back from lunch, but the Trade Source newsletter is a biannual newsletter that we put out. We work with other agencies to publish this and gives a really good insight into, especially for those SBDC participants, the different products that are available from the different government agencies for related to export. So thank you all for your time.